Well, we are once again joined by financial expert Chuck Zodda from the Armstrong Advisory Group. And Chuck, let's just start off with this. The president's attempts to fire the Federal Reserve Governor, Lisa Cook. And while President Trump says it's over allegations of mortgage fraud, it also appears to be an attempt to exert greater control over an independent branch of the government. How is Wall Street reacting to this news?
Yeah, to this point, we haven't really seen a major shift in either equities or bonds as a result of this. And I think there are a couple different ways that you can look at this. The first is we've seen a number of instances where the president has, announced something and then subsequently it's been walked back or changed. And so I think that's one way that you can look at this is, hey, maybe Wall Street thinks that, the president might decide to go down a different path at some point in the future. The other piece is, look, earlier this spring, in a decision from the Supreme Court looking at the president's ability to fire members of independent agencies, effectively, the Supreme Court laid down a marker saying, you are not allowed to touch anyone on the Federal Reserve when it comes to their employment. It simply is off limits there, even though some other agencies may end up falling, in a different bucket. So I think the other place that Wall Street is looking is basically saying, hey, there was a Supreme Court ruling earlier this year that pretty much said that this was not allowed. And as such, we are going to price it as that way unless proven otherwise. So I think that's part of the reason why, despite the letter from the president indicating that he was moving to fire Lisa Cook, there has not been much movement on Wall Street since that letter was announced. There's a quick little short-term dip for about a half hour, but that was about it that we have seen to this point here.
All that being said, do we expect to see a federal interest rate cut next month?
So right now, markets are pricing in a pretty high likelihood that we end up seeing a rate cut in September. The things that we'll be looking for in the interim to see if that gets some follow through here. First, later this week, we have a PCE inflation report that comes out. Next week, we are going to have a jobs report for the month of August. And then we also have a CPI inflation report before that September meeting as well. So if the inflation reports come in hot and the jobs report comes in hot, hey, there's a pretty good chance that you might not see any action from the Fed. If the jobs report is weak again and the inflation reports are better than expected, you could actually have a larger than expected cut, maybe a 0.5% cut instead of a quarter point. So these are some of the things that are still on the table here. But right now, the market thinks on any given day, it's anywhere between about an 80 and an 85% chance that we get a 0.25% cut at the September meeting.
So let's get into a couple of other things. The dollar has strengthened against currencies, including the euro and the Swiss franc, after more of a down period. Why do you see this happening right now?
Well, I think part of it is just, the dollar was on such a slide over the first, 6, 7 months of the year that a little bit of a retrenchment was not surprising here. But also the scale of the move has been somewhat muted. So I don't think it's a huge move that's necessarily signaling anything significant at this point. And it's also coming during a time in August when trading volumes tend to be pretty low. And I'm not sure that you really take anything from what we're seeing over the last several weeks here. So overall, foreign exchange volatility has been pretty muted in the last 3 to 5 weeks. There hasn't really been a significant move in either direction, but I do think it'll be interesting to see, hey, as we get into September and traders start to get back in the office and we start to see more activity picking up, do we start to see something on this side of things similar to what we saw back in the spring? Don't know, but obviously that'll be something that we pay close attention to.
Let's hit on a couple companies that have made some headlines recently. So, American Eagle Outfitters, they obviously made headlines for the Sydney Sweeney ad, and then they just nabbed Travis Kelce as its newest face, and that is spiking the stock price of American Eagle. And then the Cracker Barrel stock went up after they announced they were keeping their old logo. Obviously, after so much controversy over the change in what the logo was, and then they go back to an old logo. Is this just more meme stock type of trading, or is it a sign that a company's PR has a real effect on stock prices?
Well, I think the PR certainly can have an impact in the short term. I think the question on any of these is, hey, is there a lasting shift that we see? You can look back over the last decade or so at, various different things that popped up as far as, hey, here's, a crisis of image that this company's going through or one that another company's going through. And the thing that we saw pretty consistently was, after an initial move, you didn't really see a ton of follow through necessarily. It's tough for people to keep this stuff in their heads for too long. It typically is something that's pretty short lived. And ultimately, it comes back to, are you delivering a good product at a good value that's easily accessible? And that's what tends to drive companies in the longer run. So certainly you can see a little bit of a move in the short term from any of these PR items that may or may not come up. But obviously, when we look at the longer term, I don't think it's a viable strategy to try to, do this on a repeated basis. It just becomes hard to do, and you still have to be able to deliver on the product. And that's ultimately the most important thing when we look at these companies and their longer term success.
We'll keep an eye on that and a whole lot more in the next week. And we'll be back next week talking with Chuck Zodda. Chuck, appreciate the time as always.
All right. Thanks, Joe.